So we just hit record. We had just discussed the sheet, the deadlines of the 13th. We're going to move it to the 16th for having the definitions. And I was just saying we should make sure that we get Becca's input on this into the dashboard before we hit record.
Yeah. Okay, so in terms of how do we ask questions about a term and a description? Is that what you're getting at?
Well,
So
yeah, I think someone or many can just start writing the definitions, but we're going to get into where we have two words that mean the same thing and two teams maybe having a different take on how the filter should be called or whatever the element is. So ideally this list should be, we all agree, like for every single one, we are in agreement on it, or we need further discussion on it. I don't think I'm saying it very eloquently, but I want us to get to the point where we see kind of where the difference in view might be, so that we have better discussions around those in the meetings. If everyone agrees that dashboard is the right term, and I don't know if we just put little checks of sign off per person or something, or I'm okay with the definition that's there right now. I'd be like, I'm okay with that. But if somebody else doesn't, they can modify it and make it better. And at some point, we'll hopefully have like consensus on most of them. And then the diffs are where it's more interesting, I think, to spend our time discussing.
do you want to put a column in there that is just an agreement column, and then as everyone agrees, they just put their name in commas in that same cell?
Sure.
Any thoughts on that from anyone else?
There are some people like in the working group that are more involved than others. So we could, in theory, want agreement from everyone in the working group, but would that necessarily work? Would we actually be able to get some of the people who aren't as involved to get involved to do that? I guess I'm not English, I need just back to work.
The people that are actively involved, we should get their agreement.
I guess, how do you define that is what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just a case of having
Who's
just
come to the meeting?
having that agreement thing. If anyone wants to debate a particular point, they should comment and put a suggestion in, I guess. And then if we see suggestions in the next meeting, then we can go through those suggestions and we resolve them at each meeting as they come up.
I like that. Yeah, if you feel like okay with something, put your name on it, even if you're not in the meeting, I guess. But the people who are here most of the weeks would kind of will all be at the front. We might have an agreement and a disagreement column. Because I feel fairly on board with most of what everybody's doing, but I might disagree on the odd thing.
Then we can use Google comments or whatever they call them.
I was thinking the same. Yeah, any disagreements, we can just comment and come to an agreement through that.
Yeah, using a comment, at least if you disagree, you're coming with an alternative suggestion, not just disagreeing in general, because then at least that starts a conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, some of the ones that already have an alternative in column F, such as panel, another team is calling it widget. So ones like that, I think, is where we're going to see the diff.
That's my product, the team I'm in product analytics. We're currently calling it widget, but I don't see any conflict. We'd be happy to change it to panel. So if you want, we could just drop that, or I'll just signal my agreement.
Yeah.
I missed out a couple of these calls, probably because I was out. How did we come to these terms that we currently have in this sheet? Was it just someone writing them down, or was there like an agreement between the team?
On our last call, we live did it for the hour. We went through and
Okay.
sourced out of the issue, and then on the Grafana and looking at everything that we could think of that would be in the dashboard based on what we'd seen. So it was like a first pass, and we may have missed
Okay.
some. But if you watch last week's, you'll see kind of us just having the spreadsheet open. That's all we did basically for the hour.
Okay. Okay.
But
I'll
it was
take a look.
derivative. It was derivative of the analysis of the existing
Yes.
dashboards and the
Yeah.
competitors.
Okay. So it is informed. It's not just someone writing this down.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
And the column A, like the categories, kind of came out of that as we were like, oh, all of these things we're saying around like a dashboard's definition, like it has a name, a description, a data source. They kind of get replicated onto the panel config too. Like there's just some common elements between each, like a dashboard would have a name and a panel could have a name. And so like there's some repetition in the naming that we were noticing. They're not all in exactly the same sort order, but it was kind of interesting to go through that and notice that the dashboard as a whole had some very similar metadata to individual pieces of the dashboard.
No, that's cool. And I'm really glad to see text content there because I think it gives that extra flexibility to the dashboards. So I assume that would be just an area where you just put a title in or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
That's cool.
Yeah. The description, you mean? Or which?
Text content.
No, the text content, that would be the 11th row.
I see. Yes. Oh, right. Yeah. The organizational pieces, headers or sections, things like that.
Nice.
Yeah. And then the other insight that we had in row 23. So having done, I was in plan and then I did an opportunity canvas on saved queries and views. In GitLab, we use list views predominantly. So anything, whenever you query to show a list of issues, it's only a list view. I was proposing, and I hope at some point we get this, you could also view it as a table list. You could also view that query as a board. So those GitLab views, and like the only one we have in flight is list right now, but that's an alternate panel. It could be a different way of displaying data that we already have in our pocket and we already use in our views at GitLab. So that's something that was an add-on in addition to the charts and all the other ways that we could render. We could also just render like a boring list.
Yeah, true.
Like security items for my team, just a list.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or a list of projects with specific metrics. We had an example like that in Optimize recently.
A question around the descriptions. How detailed do we need these to be? Do we need these to be like technical writing level descriptions, or are they more rough outlines of what it is?
It can be quite long in sentence. Like the data team will almost write paragraphs in them, I think. I don't know if they support Markdown.
Sorry, I meant the actual, not the term, but us describing what these terms are. Sorry, I should have been clearer.
So meta. Okay, got it. I think if we could keep it to a sentence length, that would be great because everyone can grok it as they scan. But if it requires more, then let's write more.
I guess the only reason I ask is because I'm assuming eventually we'll turn this into a page on the handbook in some form. So I guess we're going to have to get someone with technical writing experience to make it sane.
Yes, good point. I was inspired by how simple Grafana's glossary is, and just like it's hard to disagree with the way they wrote there. So if we could kind of have that in mind, and then I don't know if we should ask for technical writing to come in once we kind of get it to a point. This will go in our docs, right? It's not just pajamas eventually, once we're running, our customers will also have to understand these concepts.
I would think so. So which
Yeah.
means that we would be getting their help. But I think the concept of just writing enough so it's understandable should be enough for our technical writers to come in and do whatever they have to do, and maybe even better. I mean, they try to be as succinct as possible too. So
Yeah.
I think I'm just going to copy and paste the Grafana glossary. That is brilliant.
hey, I mean, if that works too, why not?
Yeah, it's pretty good. They don't get into the detail of some of it, like panel filter and things like that. We'll have to still kind of describe, but
basically, this is going to be a free for all, right? Just say we need to get this done by Monday. Dig
yes,
in when you have a free minute, write something up, and then move on.
yes,
When you need a break from your
And-
day to day, jump in here and write something.
write some definitions and short toes too for everyone. Like if I've written something, please write over me if you have a better way to say it. I am not an avid copywriter or grammar aficionado. Okay, so let's say on the 16th, we have all these definitions. What's our next step after that? I'm just trying to think into the future. How will we then take it? We'll see on our disagreements and then start discussing until we have an agreement.
Yeah, I guess that's the only way. Just group think. Any other terms we can think of? Yeah, hopefully we'll come up with that final list that we can chuck into an MR, stick on the handbook as an output.
Do we expect a lot of disagreement? I don't think it's something we should expect.
I think everybody's on board with like whatever is easiest and aligns us so far. Filters
I
might
haven't
get
gotten
some,
the sense.
but I don't know.
What do you mean filters? What about filters?
So there's different ways you could do the filter. You could have one on every panel, or you could have one at the top that sets a date range for the whole. And how does that work? Because you could have both be true.
Yeah, it's good. It's good that you mentioned this because I was actually thinking about this and I wasn't sure if I should ask at this point, because it looks like just from defining these terms, we are already kind of dictating what the user experience could be, should be, because we're saying you could probably filter the whole dashboard and you could possibly filter a single panel. How does that work? Right. So we're now defining a user experience, even though we're not sure yet how it will actually work out. But I don't know if it's a discussion for now, or is it a discussion we should have later, or at all?
We definitely should start thinking now, I think, because highlighting the discussion we had last week, the term variable came out of it. Like I've done a lot of dashboarding across tons of products, setting some kind of high level variable such as my team's label or the core time frame. Setting those at the dashboard level affects the ease of use of a lot of dashboards. And also overrides are important though. Like sometimes you also might want to just copy a panel and make it your own in some other way that's more just your team or just or a different date or something like that. So I think that we should start talking about it now, even if we touch on some of the jobs to be done or the use cases.
Yeah, my opinion, without looking into it at all, I would say, is the dashboard filter, whatever it is set to, should probably be overwritten by the panel filter. That's how I envision users would probably want to use this, right? So on a dashboard level, maybe they have more general filters, but some of them might clash with then a filter inside a panel. And when that happens, I think the panel should win this argument, right, between the two filters. But I don't have a strong opinion, to be honest. But that's how I see it could work, and maybe it's actually the clearest to the user. But it would need
Yes.
to be obvious through the UI as well, right? That is actually happening.
Yeah, the specificity that got added
Yeah.
takes precedence, and there's some indicator that it is
Yeah.
overriding on some level. It would be
Yeah,
interesting, like
exactly.
maybe you thought you were looking at all of January on the whole board, and then one panel though is showing, oh, actually, this one's like just this week, or it's out of sync or something. It's a different variable used, but
yeah, exactly. We could actually come up with a bunch of concepts on how to show that in the UI and actually do some testing to see if the users understand, you know, how data is filtered and presented. And just that example that you just gave, you know, if something is filtered by January on the dashboard level, and then in one of the panels it's filtered by a different date, will they understand that it's overriding, right, through the UI? I'm not sure if this is something we want to do as part of this working group, though, or would this follow this work?
I think that indicating that some way to indicate a change from the main query is something we could just add as a list or add onto the list. So we keep it in mind, even if we don't action on it.
Yeah.
I think I just realized we don't have a date range on either in the list. So maybe we should add that, because I was just trying to think though, is it required for a data source and a query is it a required piece defaulting to all time maybe, but like, is a date range always there? Is
Possibly
it possible
not.
to run?
Only because there are many, you know, you might have a dashboard which, rather than having a universal time across the dashboard, you might have individual panels which are last 14 days, last 30 days, last 3 months, or whatever it might be, to see that transition over time. I mean, there are other ways of doing that, but I have seen that type of situation before. So a dashboard doesn't necessarily need to have a way of changing the date.
Right. Just like hitting an issue list. It's like everything. It's 40,000 issues in this query. I didn't time box it in any way. It's all things. But technically that is just date range equals all.
Yeah.
It's
But
all time.
In the UI at least, there could be no way for them to change that. That's what I mean.
True.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, until you decide to scope to something specific, such as the creation date or the due date or some property.
I guess it just depends on the context of what the dashboard is being used for.
Yeah, and so panels could inherit their dates or no dates, right? Like from the dashboard. Inheritance is probably going to be a word that we'll use. And then properties, that's another thing we don't have on there, but properties in Notion, properties are things you show on the graphs or in the tables. It's essentially the properties that you decide to render in some way. It's the issue title, or the little dot on the chart is the property. Assigning properties to the view is another part of it. And it just happens automatically if you pick like a chart or something. Let's say you rendered as a table, you might want to only have 3 columns or 3 properties visible, but that's another thing I was thinking about this week, that we didn't get a property. Maybe
Something
we need
else
one
that
more
comes
column
to
for required. Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
I'm gonna
that's
just
what I was
required.
thinking about. Required, yeah. Does it need to be there? And then another thing I was thinking about is it user facing, and is it important for us to know if it is or if it's not? Because, for example, unique ID, I imagine that's not user facing. They won't know a unique ID of the dashboard unless some really technical reason or requirement?
Embeds, you'd want the unique ID if we enable embedding in Markdown and things like that.
Yeah,
Grabbing it, rendering it, but yeah, it's so whether it's required and then whether it's exposed to the user or
maybe, yeah. And date range, as we just said now, maybe in some cases it is, in other cases it's not, right? When it doesn't make sense to filter by date range.
How detailed are we wanting to go into these, like different types of filters, different types of properties, or are we being relatively generic and leaving that up to the implementation?
I think we should be generic to the point of the requirement to run this in GitLab. But I don't know that we need to go to the level of the UI, but maybe we do. There's lots of different ways to do filtering, right? Like right now we have one bar in GitLab that accepts pills and queries and things like that, but there may be better ways to do filtering in the dashboard world. I don't know if we want to get into it.
The main
And
point of
drive
this,
you up.
right, is so we can give guidance in order to avoid inconsistencies. But I think there's a fine line between telling people what their requirements need to be from what their users need in their dashboard to being generic. Like they can filter and the dashboard, has to work at a certain way in order to affect the panel's filters. So we probably do need to discuss that, but then we don't need to necessarily force them to say, these are the filters you have to use. So I mean, I think there's sort of this gray area that we'll have to balance between how far do we define what people can do. But maybe what we should think about is what is as we're getting into this, as we're writing these things out, we could probably consider what our goals are in terms of how far we want to push something. But we won't necessarily know that until we start writing them, I think.
For example, in Notion, I use them all the time because you can build out any kind of query and filter. But if we were in our spec to write the way they do their filters, they basically allowed you to add any filter you want in succession all together. So I've got all these rules. I've got this additional filter, which I just added. I'm going to delete it. And I've got 2 sorts running on this. I don't think we would want to say, describe the UI that I could add as many filters as I want or something like that, or get into, there'll be an area called filter and sort that you can expose at any time. But I think we should get into filtering must accept many different filters or unlimited filters or something like that. And we also should be able to sort in multiple ways that stack or something like that. Or maybe we'll say there will only ever be one sort in our world. Does that make sense that we would capture the desire for filter flexibility and the creation of additional queries? Right now, we don't really save filters in any way, or we just rely on the URLs and the URL attributes, and all of the modern, when you're setting up a lot of these, they kind of, you set your core database and then you've got additional filters that help you make it better for your team or whatever. So I feel like properties just naturally populate the filters, because if you've got 4 things you could look at, your filter could be filtered on those 4 things. So they kind of inform, if you don't have the property, you can't filter on it. If you don't have a due date, you can't filter on that due date.
Yeah, I think what I heard you saying is that we should be able to define technical constraints without necessarily having to force specific user needs or requirements into these definitions.
Yes.
Does that sum it up? Okay.
I think they're less necessary, not necessarily, they're less technical constraints and more, I guess, how the user experiences or interacts with the dashboard. Because that's what we want, isn't it? It's not, we don't necessarily care how technically it functions. What we're more interested in is making sure there's a consistent user experience across all our dashboards at GitLab. Whether the engineer does things in one way or another, but in the background is more or less irrelevant as long as the output is the same, I guess is what I'm trying to get at. Obviously, we've got Pajamas UI components, so that's not going to happen. They will end up being consistent for the most part from a technical point of view, but I just wanted to see if that was a clearer distinction.
Yeah, because we're not doing UI in this, right? Or do you think we'll need to?
We kind of have a like in our Pajamas guidelines, we describe the do's and don'ts of the user experience, don't we? We don't necessarily prescribe exactly what should. Sometimes we say some items must be on the left or the top or the bottom, etc., but we don't describe how they should look from a UI point of view necessarily, but we do describe the behaviors and expectations that all users are expecting to see. So I do feel like eventually, once we get our descriptions, that would maybe not in this working group, but as a follow-on, maybe necessarily as some kind of Pajamas guidelines, because that is going to be the, from a designer's perspective, that's going to be the first look when we're looking to build a new dashboard is how do we do things currently? What's my target audience's needs? What do we currently suggest we do? And Pajamas is the first go-to, at least for me, when I'm having to do design work. I first look at Pajamas, and that would be a guard, I guess, against less against non-conformity. I'm trying to say, I don't know.
There could be that follow-on contribution. For example, an update to filter bar to make it work for the needs that we find here, like supporting multiple sorts or multiple filters or whatever we end up. Seeing how many different ways GitLab has done dashboards, and we've tried so many times to align, it's just, it looks painful for the user to have so many different experiences. So if we're able to upgrade, the filter bar in particular comes to mind, but every piece, so that it follows this over the next year after the working group, I think that would be awesome. And like deliver that to Pajamas. Maybe it also needs research, maybe it needs a lot more, especially on some of the complex complex UI components like filtering.
And of course, this will be iterative too. So, I mean, this is just a place to start. As we start to really dig into things, we'll start to get a better sense of how everyone, what they really need to get out of this documentation.
I think it would make sense to have some guidelines for dashboards come out of this work, possibly into Pajamas, so that as we said, so when a designer starts working on a dashboard, they already have some guidelines that they can start with, so that it's also more consistent, right? So that not every dashboard in GitLab looks different. And then the other thing, and I think filtering is actually a really good example. I'm actually working on improving filtering and documenting the filtering alternatives in terms of UI to the current filter component, because the current filter component is so complex already. And if we keep adding stuff to it, it will be even more complex and it's hard to maintain it, basically. So I'm thinking, okay, we have the dashboard guidelines in Pajamas, and then those dashboard guidelines can refer to the filtering guidelines that I'm currently working on and that already exist, basically, so that we keep it in multiple smaller pieces of guidelines that you can refer to as you need them, basically, right? That's how I see it at the moment.
Yeah, that's a great call out. There's no reason that we need to define everything in terms of dashboards if we already have a component defined for that.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's also why I started working on this, on documenting these filtering alternatives, and we're also working on documenting an actual filter builder, which is very similar to what Kristen showed earlier from Notion, which we don't have documented in GitLab at the moment because we rely so heavily on the filter component, right? So that we can use these things as we'll need them in the dashboards, because as I started working on exploring these dashboard concepts, I realized we'll need other filtering methods that is not a filter component, because that filter component won't be able to fit into a panel, for example, right? Or if you do push it into a panel inside of a dashboard that has multiple panels in it, it will be really hard to use because it will be in a tight space, basically, right? So yeah, that's why I started working on that. It came from a need to use filtering in dashboards. So I think it will align quite well with what we'll need.
And we could maybe MVC that panels inherit or something like that. So we'd go out with the main filter maybe being at the top or something like that. And then we could augment it over time. But that's cool that you've already gone down that path. I think the two will come together nicely. Oh, and we should check on Grafana's filter. I haven't done a deep dive on it, but because we own that code base now from Grafana, we should also just double check that what the guidance you're doing can also work with Grafana, that they'd be able to merge into that UI too.
Is there like, I don't have access to Grafana, I think. Is there like an example dashboard or an example account that we could take a look at? Or should I just sign up and try it out?
Justin would know more, but observability forked it at a certain point. So what they have in GitLab is different. It's a release or two behind what's in the current Grafana.
Okay.
So you probably would want to go in, and they called it Go UI at GitLab, and see how they're using the filters.
What did I link to in that issue? I don't remember what I found, but there's some, was it just the documentation, or did they actually have an example on their website, like a demo?
I think it was just the docs.
Okay.
But yeah, I'd love to see kind of how they expose their filters and how that works. And then we could align the needs of that, the requirements of the already existing UIs to the other ones too.
Yeah, stuff like that. I don't think we've changed in OpsTrace. We had to fork it because of licensing mainly, and also because we need to basically hack it apart so it looks like GitLab. But we haven't changed much yet. So there's an OpsTrace project. Actually, I don't know if it's called OpsTrace. I just know it's got the little squid octopus logo thing. Okay. So you'll know it when you see it.
Okay.
But then I think their docs are pretty helpful too. Grafana docs.
Yeah. So like we might have some of that for free, although it's not in our design system yet. It's not in Pajamas. They're trying to convert it to look like Pajamas. So we can still set the precedence for how the GitLab filter should be, and they can modify it to be that. But there may be parts of that filter, specifically its requirements, that we should just ensure that we have the granularity that's necessary.
And taking a step back, looking at the way that we've defined the delivery or due dates and the labels or the titles that we gave each of those sections, the 16th was actually just to map all the pieces, or the 13th, what we had before. And the definitions, which is really what we've been talking about today, isn't until the end of February.
So maybe we're done. Because we kind of got them
Yeah.
all, as many as we could think of from our meetings are in the sheet now.
And of course, as we go, we can add more. We don't need, like, you know,
Mhm.
things come
Yeah.
up. That's just the way it is. But yeah, I mean, I think maybe we
Go
hit for
us.
this. Yeah. And then after that, it's just, now we've got a month and a half to start writing
Yep.
stuff.
To lock the definitions, descriptions, and then what the final requirements are. Nice. That this week leading into end of release plus a friends and family day, it's nice to have something done early.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't change how we can work, right? Just popping in and out and writing stuff. Like, just because we have a month and a half doesn't mean we can't get this done earlier too.
Yes. I
You really
want to
like
be the
stuff.
quickest working group of all time. Like, I want us to be done before any other working group. So if we can finish in the next couple of weeks or 3 weeks, if we have agreement, that would be awesome.
Yeah, we could probably break this down, the definition of objects, into things like we want to have a draft done by X, we want to get feedback by X, and then be done by the 28th.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Feel free to propose that and just write in what you think the dates would be.
I did that last time and I picked a friends and family day.
It's all good.
And we do have one on the
did-
27th of February too, by the way.
Ollie, what were you saying?
No, I was saying, if you just want to check out what Grafana looks like and how it works, the previous company I worked at actually built their product on top of Grafana, and they have a demo that you can access and click around to see what Grafana looks like. I'll share that on the agenda doc. If you just want to see what Grafana looks like without having to download.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Oh, wow. Interesting. Yeah. Oh, I remember this dashboard. This is cool. Lots of a lot of
Yeah.
monitoring, like a real dashboard, systems.
Mhm.
They don't really have a query at the top or data source.
And it actually links to other dashboards as you click inside these
Mhm.
Yeah.
panels. Nice.
Mhm.
But it's not possible to change this probably, right? Because it's a done thing.
Well, I don't know how we are going to skin ours, the one we forked.
It's going to look like GitLab.
Yeah. The goal is to have it look like it has inherited pajamas.
Yeah, the left panel that they have where you've got their navigation, that's going to be removed and integrated with our navigation or some other mechanisms if it's not worthy of being in the nav. And a lot of that top action items, we got to figure out how to make those work too.
Yeah. And they've got some exposed filters that they've pre-decided, such as environment or interval environment, node names, and PMM. So those are some, maybe 4 important properties from this data set that can affect and are exposed.
This is
I'm
what I
guessing-
envision is like a top level filtering, basically, right? On the dashboard level.
Yeah, and I imagine if you're an admin, there's some exposed edit or like configure button that we don't have that would, where they're choosing these filters for everybody else.
Yeah.
I think you can also filter on the top right. There's also a time interval filter.
Oh yeah. Oh, cool. Oh, I love this. It's got from and to, so you can get specific. And it defaults to the last 12 hours. I like the idea of having a consistent concept of time, even if it's defaulted to all or everything. Thanks for sharing this. This is cool.
Yeah, yeah, the stuff that we have right now is not, it doesn't have any content, so it's not really as useful as this.
The panels themselves and sections are also here, like the anomaly detection, you could actually close that section. The sections themselves have open close abilities.
Oh yeah, there's
And
extra
then-
ones all the way at the bottom. Command centers.
Yeah, there's tons.
Service summary.
Everything you want to see is here. So it seems like the alignment of panels is another thing to think about. I don't know if that would be at the dashboard level where you're dragging things around and
And do we
giving them
have
a size.
Do we have a container or a accordion container on the dash on our spreadsheet?
We only put header and section. So maybe sections have accordion ability, or maybe they're separate, like just, you could also just have copy or just like blank white space that you need to, but.
It's categorized under text content though, so I wouldn't
Right.
assume a section in text content would have the accordion capabilities.
What about organization elements?
Yeah, maybe.
If I spelled accordion right, doesn't look right.
That's what I hate about spreadsheets. They don't give you spell check stuff.
I know.
No one can spell anymore. Just tell us what to do.
I know. So organization of the whole dashboard, it would include maybe some elements such as that, panels shifting around, like a grid maybe, or like, I don't know even what you call it, like there's some
Well,
kind of
even when
layout
I
and then you're
watched-
associating panels.
There should definitely be a grid concept. Otherwise, like we need to help people not build MySpaces, right? Save them from
Fugly.
themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So, and I noticed that there's probably some Zoom lag, but even in the analytics demo, when you're dragging something size, they give you a gray background of where it's going to end up if you drop it right now. And I've done that before when I've designed silly things like this without using someone that already built it. And I tried to stick to a grid too, to let users know that there's a very specific way that you're allowed to arrange these things and size these things. So I think grid is a good call out.
I think I actually checked in on this with Tim. There are capabilities to limit the sizing. So for example, for a certain panel, you could be able to say it can be shrunk below this point, or it can be extended beyond this point, which I think is really good. It will be really useful.
They have like a max min definition sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because again, you're saving them from the stuff. If they make it too small, they'll never find it again. They'll forget they did it.
Yeah.
In SciSense,
again,
when they
that's
look at
a-
our
Go ahead.
Gmao, they like line it all up like these tiny little graphs, even though every single one needs to be expanded across 40 PMs, they'll have every single metric as a postage size stamp on one dashboard, kind of like this one, but you can't actually view anything. You just have to click each one, but it's like shrunk it down. And then they're basically getting the entirety of the whole product org in one huge view, but it's useless in the sense that you can't actually visualize. Each one should open as a modal above it or something, or go to its own page. Currently it goes to its own page. So maybe some of them could have a detail view and this, like the small view, like maybe it's just one number or one small thing. If it gets shrunk too small, it could default to some different number or a different state.
Yeah, maybe we could do something like that, or we could limit to the minimum point that you can shrink the panel. We do already have the spark lines, for example, in Optimize, the work we do in Optimize, where it's just like a trend line, right? So you show a metric, you describe the metric with the label, possibly you have the trend icon, so you can say it's either increasing or decreasing. And then below it, we often show the trend line. So it's like a small chart that gives you some information, but not all the details, right? It gives you a nice overview, and you can hover over it and it will show you some additional information. It doesn't, we haven't predicted any interactions like clicking on it and it would show you a bigger chart. We haven't identified a need for it, I guess, so far. But we have these capabilities, is what I'm trying to say. We can show really small charts in terms of trend lines and next to metrics, and we can show bigger charts, right, if we need them.
That's cool. Okay, we're at time, so but thank you everyone. This has been a great session, and I guess we'll just all now start adding in our descriptions and add items as they come up in prep for next week's call. If we could have all descriptions in, that would be super cool.
Yeah, I mean, I did do some draft dates, so end of the month for the draft to have everything
Nice.
at least written in, get feedback by the 10th of February, and then be done by the 20th.
Nice.
Totally flexible. Totally just looked at the calendar and said what seems to make sense based on this date and around that. So
This looks
all
good.
right. Cool.
Awesome. Thanks everyone.
Yeah, thanks
Have a
everyone.
good
Have a good
day.
rest of your day.
See you. Bye.
See ya.
But